The following presentation was recorded live for the International Association of Square Dance Callers' 33rd Annual Convention. We take you live to the Renaissance Suites Hotel in Charlotte, North Carolina, where our session is just getting underway.
Let me start again. And these straws that you have in your hands are something that I picked up from a fellow named Ingo Tietze, who's a friend of mine and a renowned voice scientist. And he came and gave a seminar recently at the university where I teach on how to maintain the human voice and what do you do when your voice gets tired. And the only thing that he had to offer us was these little cut-off straws. Let me explain what the use of these little straws are. Something happens to the human instrument when you close up the place where the sound exits from. When your mouth's wide open, there's a different kind of arrangement inside the throat than when the mouth is closed up. When the mouth is closed up, it creates positive pressure inside. You can feel it. If you'll just purse your lips really tightly and then blow, you'll feel your lips balloon out. And if you're really sensitive to it, you'll feel the air pressure go all the way down your throat, down into your voice box and all. And when you're in that position, when the obstruction is right here at your lips, oh, thank you very much. We're going to have to make a little room here. We're going to be talking about harmonization here, and these folks are just kind enough to roll a piano in where we can get it. If you'll just leave it right there by the doorway, thank you very much. We don't really have to come very much farther in than that. Oh. Maybe a couple of you guys could just lift up on, no, it's on the other end that it's going to need to be lifted on its dolly again. I thank you so much for that help. Let me come back while they're working on that. Let me just say that when most of you sing, you use your vocal folds not just to vibrate with, but also to control the exit of your breath. That makes your vocal folds do double duty. So by putting the pressure at your lips, then it relieves your vocal folds of that extra pressure and allows your vocal folds to just vibrate the way they're supposed to vibrate. That's where the little straw comes in. If you make a very small opening, you can blow into that thing, and you can vocalize very vigorously without hurting yourself at all. So if you're first up in the morning, as some of you are, and haven't done very much talking yet, you can just take this thing in your lips and blow on it and phonate, vibrate your vocal folds in any range that you want, like this. Just go gliding all the way through your range, top to bottom. Now, the other thing you do, take your hand and put it in your lips and stick your hand out in front of it so that you can feel the quantity of the air. I need to be a Buddha. I need several hands. So you need several. If you do, and you get up to the top of your voice and there's no more air flowing through, that means that your vocal folds have turned stiff on you and are not letting the air move through. But if you can keep a constancy of air stream, you can gradually get to the point where you go into something that's called flowing phonation. Flowing meaning the flow of your breath. That's that most healthy of all ways to make sound. So that's a tool that can help you get your voice warmed up. You're driving along in the car. That's a terrible place to have to warm up. Arriving at the dance, you go into the restroom for a few minutes, and you don't want to go and sing a lot, but this little thing can do wonders to help you stretch out your voice a lot. I actually, before I started using a straw, I'd read this guy's articles before, and so I was too lazy to go buy a straw, and so I just learned to form my lips into a really tightly drawn W. And accomplishes approximately the same thing, except that the straw actually is a little bigger than the W space that I was making. So the first time I tried it, I ran out of breath. There wasn't enough obstruction compared to what I was used to. But his recommendation was to start out with a great big straw like you use for drinking milkshakes. It doesn't change very much. It just puts a little bit of closure at the front end, and you move all the way down from those big straws down to where you have a little martini straw, and you can gradually teach your voice to vibrate in a very positive way. You get positive pressure in your throat. And gradually you learn that the vocal folds learn what it feels like to be vibrating in a positive environment, positive pressure environment. Then you take the straw away, you open your mouth up, and discover what your voice sounds like when your vocal folds are doing what they really ought to be doing, instead of what they have been doing all of your life, which is to vibrate and also to stay stiff to control the air. There are two other positive things about this. When you go up into the top of your voice, particularly you men try this, you'll feel at the bottom a vibration that rumbles in your chest and down around your jawbone and so forth. That's the mode that most men talk in. And then you'll feel as you glide up the scale, your voice will flip into a lighter mode. And it feels kind of wimpy. But the truth is, when you actually open up your mouth on that, it doesn't turn out to be wimpy at all. Listen. There's plenty of noise there. Well, see, inside it feels really kind of not so good. But in the outside, it turns out to be a real tone. It's just a different mode. And that's actually the thing that we're going to be talking about today, is the different modes in your voice. Now, everybody try that. I demonstrate it. Try it. Buzz it low. You can feel it vibrate. You women may not feel it vibrate quite so much on your chest as the men do. Now go ahead and glide on up, and you'll feel your voice flip over. Now you're in that range. Open up your mouth. That was impressive. Yes. That's actually where I thought, I got it. I didn't tell you where it was. We had our seminar. It was out at the state hospital, and there was a bunch of scientists there.
For 2 years, I've been driving on the highway going.
That's right. The interesting thing. Yeah, that's right. You go, I don't know why this car isn't moving. The truth is that those lip buzzes have the same positive effect. The one difference is that when you do lip buzzes, you have to get the velocity of the breath moving so much to get your lips vibrating, and your lips are ever so much bigger than your vocal folds. So my sense is that lip buzzes are not as efficient as I used to think. They're still pretty effective. A little straw can help. There's another really positive thing. I'm offering this to you as a kind of way to get us warmed up. There's another very positive thing that I talked about in the intermediate session yesterday that can be done with this, and that's to not only help you get your range to move upwards, but to get it to settle down. When a voice is truly relaxed, like as when you've been asleep all night and you get up in the morning, you know how gravelly your voice feels when you get up? No, I can't hardly talk. It's just, don't bother me. It's too early. That kind of sound is actually very useful to relax the voice. How many of you, as you're partway through dance, find your voice getting tired? Or, conversely, that you're getting the upper notes really well, but you're starting to lose the bottom notes on your voice. That's another indication that there's weariness that occurs. Question?
Is that called a free tone? Is that what you're talking about?
It is, yeah. It's commonly called a Freitone, which is a German term for free tone. So, but in our business they've got. That's right. No, that's really correct. But that little rattling sound is really a healthy thing, because all of the musculature that's normally active when you're singing is at rest, or almost all the musculature. And in that mode, your vocal folds, as I've described before, are kind of thick and square at their touching points. And when they vibrate in that capacity, they get a very rich, undulating pattern of vibration that makes rich overtones. It's very healthy for that to be the case. This, if you have a hard time finding that free tone, this can be very useful by allowing you to start up in the voice and glide to the real bottom and then open up into that free tone. I'll show you. Try that. This sound that you all are making is the sound that Russian choirs use on the basses, where they get that rumbly quality, like a 32-foot pipe on an organ. You touch it and you don't hear it. You just feel the heat vibrate. That free tone is really, really useful for relaxing the voice. So if you find yourself with your voice just rising up higher as the evening goes along, at your next break, take a little straw and find yourself into that free tone. And then use that free tone to recalibrate your voice, like this. All I'm doing is moving from that free tone into a sung tone, but trying to maintain the sort of similar relaxation. Then thereafter, instead of the usual pattern, which is I can feel inside my throat something elevate itself upwards as I go to that upper note. It's that movement upwards that causes us to lose the relaxed position. Now, the larynx rises, it moves us into a different position, and it's not as efficient. Would you all join me and try that? So first, find your free tone. Now move over into a real tone. Now back to the free tone. A little higher. Good. So as you do that kind of thing, that can sort of settle your voice down. The clinician that was making the presentation was actually talking about people who are teachers, particularly singing teachers who sing all day long and talk all day long, and then they have to go and perform at night and have no voice left. Does that sound like anything that afflicts you all? And his statement was that through overusage, a voice can get weary. And the way to give it a moment's rest is to find that free tone and then recalibrate your voice. And that can be done, as you saw, fairly quickly. Of course, it's early in the morning. It's another thing when it's along about 10 o'clock at night, and it's been hours that you've been talking, and your voice has sort of gotten into this mode, and then you, I can't find that thing again, because your larynx has gradually climbed into a wrong place. The little straw can sometimes help you find that again. So I offer that to you as a way to warm yourselves up. It's also a wonderful way to cool yourselves down. Athletes know that when they've warmed up and then they've done their work, if they will cool down afterwards, stretch out, and not just get off the track and go on to do something else, but actually cool down, then their muscles won't cramp and stiffen on them. And on the drive home, using your straw to just return to that free tone would be a nice way to cool yourself down afterwards and come back to an at-rest place. So now let's move on to the topics for today. So far in the seminar, we've talked about posture, we've talked about breathing, we've talked about how to get a healthy flowing tone and hit that point that I call the threshold where your voice works spontaneously. And we've talked a little bit about how you can get some extra resonance enhancement in your voice. So by opening up the space between the laryngopharynx and the oropharynx. Those were all part of the basic class. The intermediate class had to do with, I can't remember, placements, yeah, moving your sound forward and back. We did some tuning of vowels yesterday to get along in there. What were some of the other things that we did the other day, yesterday? I'm just wanting to make sure that Oh yeah, we talked a little bit about how to change dynamics, how to sing loudly and how to sing softly, and still keep your voice healthy while we're doing it. And then we talked a little bit about how you take that stretching breath and you sing all the way through with that stretching breath. I just want to remind everybody, those were the foundations upon which our discussion today are built. But you'll notice that yesterday when we were talking about this, we discovered a variety of different ways to create different intensities in the singing and different qualities of sound, ranging from very bright and lively to serious and somber, and healthy ways to go about do that. Now, today's discussion is going to touch on the thing that is probably the most difficult to accomplish, and therefore depends upon the foundations that have been laid, and that is how do you expand your range upwards and downwards. And so the first thing that I'd like to do is to come over to the piano. I'll need somebody to hold the microphone for me. The first thing I'd like to talk to you about is the overtone series. Every time you hit a note on a piano, or every time you sing a note, you all can sit down if you want to, if you can find a place to sit, because I'm going to be talking here just a little bit. Anytime you sing a note, you produce not only the sound that you hear, the pitch that's being produced, but you produce a series of overtones over the top of that. It happens to do with the characteristics of a vibrating string, like a piano string. When you strike this note, the string from one end to the other vibrates back and forth and sets up a pattern of vibration. But upon closer examination, that long string divides itself in the middle, and the two halves are also oscillating as they go back and forth. And it's that subdivision of oscillation that sets up another secondary vibration. And then those strings, divide themselves in half, and those divide themselves in half, and those divide themselves in half. So there is a very, very complex action that goes on in a vibrating string, believe it or not. Our vocal folds are a little bit like those vibrating strings. So they don't just vibrate from one end to the other. They set up those very complex waveforms. Those vibrations are also present in the quality of the note that you produce, and those give the tone an enriched, enhanced quality. I don't know if any of you have ever played around with a tuning fork, but a tuning fork is so pure that it produces no overtones, and it's a very sterile kind of a sound, whereas most musical instruments like the prospect of that. I want you to see this played out. If I hit this note on the piano, that's the note that I'm going to start with. But if I put this string down quietly, take the damper off of it, you'll be able to hear that string vibrate. The reason it vibrates is because it's responding to the sympathetic vibration that was produced by the neighboring string, but I didn't strike it. That same thing happens here. Hear it? Yeah, the farther away you get from it, the weaker the signal is. Well, it's all kind of fun, but actually that overtone series is the heart and soul of Western harmony. Back in the Middle Ages, everybody understood that you could all sing in unison, but then some monks along the way discovered that you could sing at the distance of a perfect fifth, and they'd just go planing along at fifths, and you get that kind of Gregorian chant organum feeling that belongs to ancient Catholic liturgy. It's very austere sounding. It's sort of like... And composers who want to evoke that medieval period know to compose in that pattern. That austerity gradually started to give way as they began to understand the overtone series more, and they started exploring notes above that those early low frequencies, and they discovered the third of the chord. And the third of the chord is what we use most for our harmonization now. So it gets real sweet sounding, right? So you get, it's this. It's that sound that enriches a chord. So you get that opening sound, and you put that third in the middle, and all of a sudden it sounds really sweet. You put that sound, and it's a little austere, and you put that one in it, and it starts to sound enriched. And so in the period of music that we live in, that's the harmonization that's most interesting. Now, interestingly enough, you've maybe been exposed to modern harmony, which doesn't sound like harmony at all. It sounds like dissonance, particularly, note after note after note of unresolved dissonance. And all those gentlemen are exploring the upper reaches of the harmonic sequence, where they move past the sixths into seconds and minor seconds, and they're built into the harmonic system, but they're not as closely related, and therefore they sound dissonant to our ears. Believe it or not, we require a certain amount of dissonance in order to enjoy music. Music with nothing but harmony in it gets boring after a while. It's too predictable. When you hear some dissonance, it sets up a tension. And when that tension is resolved, then it's very satisfying. It's like having an argument with your wife and how it feels afterwards. It's you get this sense of unresolved harmony, of tension, and that jangles a person's nerves a lot. But you set up a pattern where you sing something like this, and it's like, yeah, that feels so good. And churches have done this for years. It's just to put it off as long as possible and finally get it resolved, and the audience is sitting on the edge of their seat saying, please.
They were bad pianists.
I'm going down this road because when I'm wanting to talk about harmonization, when you harmonize, what you're looking to do is to find a note that matches harmonically the note that's being played in the melody. Scales in our Western culture are designed on repetitive patterns. For example, here's a C, and then and you come back, that's the octave, that's that first harmonic, that's the overtone. And the scale's been divided up into 8 little subdivisions along the way. Some of those notes match really nicely. That note matches really well. So the third of the chord is very harmonic. The fifth of the chord, fifth step of the chord, is very harmonic. And the top is harmonic. Now this note is a little weird, because here it sort of matches. It's not a third, but it's a third below the fundamental, so it creates its own set of harmony to it. So running along in thirds is something that we really like to do. Running along in fifths is something that they used to dig a lot, but we don't dig it so much. However, if you're singing bluegrass really likes that open, sort of austere quality to it. So a part of it is trial and error. But mostly the melodies that you sing are built upon the root of the chord, the third of the chord, the fifth of the chord, and the octave of the chord. Somebody throw me a melody. Offer a melody. Okay, that's perfect. 3 2 1 2 3 3 3 2 2 2 3 3 3 5 5 3. If you count up which of those are harmonic notes, it's about 80% are on the strong notes of the chord. So all you got to do is to figure out which note of the chord is being played and sing something else. That's easy to say. But if you're singing where are the harmonic notes there? The most likely one is to sing a third higher than that. that doesn't sound quite right, because that note doesn't belong in that key, so you go to another place. But your ear tells you that as much as your knowledge of music. Here's another possibility. So that you want to sing. Well, some of that works, doesn't it? Some of it sounds a little odd. All I did in the harmony was just go back and forth between the notes that weren't being used in that scale. Sounds like a Beethoven symphony. It doesn't sound like something you come out of. But there are actually lots of options to play. So, what else can I tell you about that except that you understand that that's how the process is made? Interestingly, most songs don't stay in the same key all the way along. They'll say it's in the key of A. But the key of A has some other closely related scales that are built on it. For example, if you take the key of A, the harmonic notes, particularly that note, the fifth note of the scale, if you build a scale on that, that's the E major scale, and that's the secondary scale associated with A. Of course, do you really want to know this? Yeah, the answer to it is that when you're singing along Mary Had a Little Lamb, it has some keys that are associated with it. Then, now we've got into that fifth scale. And the knowledge that what in music is called the dominant key, the scale built on the fifth step, is really important. Help to create that tension and resolve it. That feels really satisfying. And so, as soon as you know where that scale step is, where you've gone into that dominant key, then you can start borrowing pitches from that scale. You know what? This is more information than you already really need. Except to say that scales are built in such a way that some notes in a scale harmonize well and some don't. And so, let's throw out another sort of simple tune. Anybody? Okay, so here's this note. This tune goes 1 1 5 5 6 6 5 4 4 3 3 2 2 1. So, if you're going to harmonize that thing, everybody try it out. We'll get some very interesting sounds. Everybody try their own. If that's the scale step that's number 1, you could go there, or you can go there. It doesn't matter. Everybody gets their own way. I'm going to play the melody. Find your harmony note. Go. Now, everybody sort of migrated to that note already, and that's no longer available as a harmony note. So you can go, you can stay right on the middle note. Ba, ba, black sheep, ba, ba, black sheep. I stayed on the very same pitch, and it ended up harmonizing both notes because it splits the difference. Yeah, or another alternative. So here we go again, ba, ba. if you're picking up what's going on here. People are filling in the harmonies wherever they are interested in doing so. And it sounds a little bit like an improvised choir. It sounds like a gospel choir, certainly. Often what gospel choirs are a bunch of people who don't read music, who have developed their sense of harmonization, and there isn't any unity, meaning people are all over the place choosing every possible harmonic note along the way, and so there's this richness to the sound. That's exactly what was sounding in your ears. Choose another tune, another simple folk tune. Okay? Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe that's why I love it.
So you got it? You'd hear 3 dum, 3 2 1, 5 4 3. That stays really close to the main notes of the scale step. So here we go. Where are you going to find your harmony note? It would either be that note or it would be that note. You can choose. Go. See how they run. That's really nice. And as you go along playing this game, if you don't start off being very good at it, don't lose any sleep. It's one of those things that you just pick up as you go. So if you're looking for a good time, traveling to or from a dance, if you're looking for fun afterwards, just sing simple tunes and harmonize them. You'll remember that your parents, before they had a lot of radio and television and other diversions, diverted themselves by sitting around after dinner harmonizing tunes. They were usually church hymns or patriotic songs or something like that. But it was just something that people did for entertainment. And nobody taught them how to do it. They just picked it up. Their ears told them what I've just described to you as the theory behind music. You pick it up because it sounds good. But if you don't start off sometime, you don't get down the road very far. Just remember that within the scale steps, there are certain notes that are more sympathetic in their harmonization than others. The most easy solution is to sing a third above or a third below. And that will solve your trouble about 60 or 70% of the time. Then every once in a while you come to a note that as you're tracking along in thirds or in sixths, that thirds are this, sixths are this, and I don't know if you figured that out, but sixths and thirds are identical just in where they're dividing on the scale. That note right there above it is a third, and then if I go that note down an octave, it produces a sixth. So they're very similar. They're separated by the third scale step. So anyway, if you go along singing in that pattern, you can get away with about 60 or 70% of most notes that need to be harmonized. But then every once in a while, you'll run into something that it sounds wrong. And at that point, then you need to move off of that and go into the more square kind of 1, 5, 1, 1, 5, 1. And you hear that? Mary Had a Little Lamb? This sounds good, this sounds good. That one doesn't sound like it belongs exactly. Instead, is closer in harmonization than both are acceptable, but this one, that one is weird because that note doesn't belong in that scale. That one does, and this one doesn't. And you'll only figure that out by trial and error. Truly, that's the heart and soul of it. Any other questions about harmonization? Good. Phew, glad that's over. Let's get you back up on your feet again. We're going to talk about how to extend your range now. I'd like to have all of you, come on, we're getting a little too many, maybe we push some chairs back, but I want you to talk, I want you to make the sound shaw in a comfortably low range. Would you try that? Shaw. Okay, try it again. Shaw. Now let's have the ladies try it by themselves. And don't do it in men's low range, do it in your low range. Whatever is comfortably low range for you. Go. Good. When you do that, all of you should feel some vibrations down in your chest. Try it and see. Is that correct? That range that you're singing in is the chest voice range, the modal voice, the kind of voice that men speak in most of the time. In that pattern, your vocal folds are very relaxed on the inside of themselves and very square in their vibration at the place where they vibrate with each other. That creates a very complex waveform that has lots of energy that goes down into the trachea, down toward the lungs. And so you feel it vibrating just underneath your sternum. Now go up a little ways above that. I'll set the pitch for you, and then I'd like to have you speak about that. But basically, am I right in saying that low one vibrates here in your chest, maybe here in the back of your throat a little bit? Correct? Now, if I go from shaw to shaw, shaw, you can hear that something's changed beside the pitch. The vibrating pattern of the vocal folds has changed a little bit. Try it. Say shaw on that pitch. Shaw, shaw. Now, don't glide off, but just stay right on that pitch. Shaw, shaw. Just don't have to sing, just speak. Shaw. Yeah, now what does that vibrate like? You still got vibrations in your chest?
Yeah, but it's a tighter vibration.
He says a tighter vibration.
Yeah, it feels like, if I think of it like a waveform, it feels like the wave is smaller.
It is. The pitch has gone up. But the way that your vocal folds vibrate has caused your voice to change from one mode, one register, into a different kind of a register. It's now a kind of a mixing quality because it's got lots of chest in it, but it's got some vibrations up in your mouth. Try it again and see if you don't sense that. Shaw, shaw. Yeah, it kind of goes down into your chest, but it's got a little bit of vibration in your mouth. Does anybody not feel that? Yes, there's some energy down in your throat, down into your trachea, but it's now starting to elevate up into the lower part of your face. Now do this. I'll set it up, and then you'll do it. Shaw, 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 shaw. Okay, where do you feel the vibrations? They start moving up into the eye sockets a little bit more. Do you still have any connection in your chest? That's exactly right. It's a little bit. It's still connected. That's, again, a mixing voice, meaning that it has the low quality, and it's now starting on to take some characteristics of the light voice as well. Now go higher than that. Shaw! 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 Where do you feel the vibrations? Yes. It just kind of climbs right up the front of your face. Something in your nose. Maybe some of you will feel it across your forehead. Yeah? Do you feel it in your chest anymore? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe not. There are several modes in the human voice. There are really just two modes. There's a heavy voice, which we call chest voice, and a light voice, which we call head voice. Women, by and large, are familiar with the head voice, and the chest voice is the unlearned territory. For female callers, it's not the case. You women have spent years trying to be like a man. And shoot, I was looking for a way to get a rise. Nobody responded. Nobody responded. And aren't you glad? Most women callers have developed a very strong chest voice. It grew out of the tradition, but it's just that way. But for most women in the culture, the head voice is their predominant place where they speak. Therefore, it's the strong mode for them. For men, it's quite the opposite. The chest voice is the mode that we know well. We're a little nervous about the upper mode because it starts to threaten our masculinity. And so there's a kind of a social taboo that we have to get over if we're going to sing in those variety of ranges.
one of the reasons women callers have to use that range is because a lot of men can't hear the upper ranges. So it's very difficult for them to call if the dancers can't hear them.
That's been the justification that's been used for as long as people have been there, but I don't share that same opinion. What I share, with the opinion that I have, is that if a woman doesn't know how to use the upper part of her voice properly, her voice takes on a shrill and unpleasant element to it that makes the men on the floor feel like their mother's telling them to clean their room. And socially, it doesn't. Nobody likes it. But if you listen to women who learn how to modulate their voices successfully high, it's a very, very attractive quality and easy to follow. There are problems with being understood, but those are questions of being understood. It's sloppiness in the way that words are said. And I think you give yourselves another generation in your CALLERLAB environment, and women will find their voices, and they'll be able to sing in that upper range that heretofore they've been taught that they can't sing in because nobody can hear them. I don't share the folk wisdom that is part of your organization because I spend too much time working with women in their upper range. And in the same area that classical music, they say, you know, you get a woman and she sings up high, you can't understand her. The truth is that if it's set up right, you can have a woman sing in the top part of her voice, and she can be very easily understood. But she just has to follow certain principles to make it so. So I have a little bit different of opinion than what you've said, but you've certainly articulated the common wisdom that's in your organization right now.
Perhaps a more practical reason is the fact that the keys of the music, singing calls, and to some degree patterns, are designed for men, forcing women's range down. That would be a more practical explanation. That
is also true. With digital technology, that's beginning to be less and less an issue. But there's still an awfully lot of custom that is in the organization that sort of causes men to view women that way, and in many cases causes women to view themselves that same way. And I suspect that the time will come when that barrier will be broken. Hope it will. Anyway, I'm mostly interested in helping you find access to those variety of places. For men, it's that upper range that's the mystery. It wasn't a mystery before you went through puberty, and then because you sang in that range readily. But then you went through puberty, and you went through that period of time when you didn't want to even remotely sound like a boy. You wanted to be a man, and so you cultivated the heaviness side of your voice. And after 10 years of doing that, you'd sort of forgotten what that other voice was like, and it had atrophied a little bit. And so now it's weak, or seemingly it's weak. It actually isn't so very weak. But I'm going to try to show you how you can blend those things together. Would you say in the low range, Shaw? Then in the lower middle range, the mixing range, Shaw. Glide between them. Shaw. Good. Nobody has any trouble doing that. But if you look more carefully, you'll see your characteristics that's going to set you up for trouble. For example, if you feel right here in your throat, you don't have to actually touch it, but it's in this range. If you sing Shaw and your voice box is at rest, and you say Shaw and your voice box climbs, then you're going to be sorry. That's going to cut you out of some of your range. If, however, you can say Shaw, Shaw, and not have your voice box climbs, then you're going to be able to go Shaw and not have that up and down motion in your throat. First, just try it once, and then come back, and then I'll answer your question. Yeah. You?
Is that similar to when we were changing the vowels, changing the shape of the vowels?
It is somewhat like that. What it does is isolate the muscles that control the up and down quality of the larynx and teach them that they should be passive, and the actual changing of pitch should not be by raising and lowering the larynx, but leaving the larynx right where it sits and finding an alternative way to get there. So try that one more time. Here's the low, Shaw. The low up about half an octave. Shaw. Try it again. Shaw. Try it again. Shaw. Shaw. Higher. That's the range. Thank you. Here we go again. Shaw. The upper one. Shaw. Glide between. Shaw. And all you're doing is trying to avoid the sense of going yee-ah, but from that rested position, get to that pitch and that pitch and that ah. Okay? If you do that, your larynx will be more at rest. You will be those people who don't lose the bottom of your voice as the evening goes along. Those of you who allow your larynx to climb, as the evening goes along, those lower notes will become harder to access. You ladies, some of you, that might have been an awkward transition. For many women, that's the most unstable part of a female's voice for many women. Maybe not for you girls, because you've spent a lot of time working on that low range. Okay, so now take Shaw. 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 For men, some of you men, that's an awkward range. It has a tendency to be unstable. Didn't sound like it in this group. That's also a place for women if the low one that we just did a moment ago isn't the unstable one. This one often is the unstable one. And so then let's go from Shaw. 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 And for most men, that's the really vulnerable one. It'll flip on you instead of being stable. And yet the solution to it is to become familiar with it. If you're able to go, Shaw, then you have access to that range. Shaw, Shaw. If you can slide between those notes and do so smoothly, then you can gain access to a lot of notes. Now, why is that important? Many of you hold on to the thought that there are certain keys that are right for your voice. That's another one of those folkways that I think needs to be laid aside. If you have a range, then you have access to multiple scales that have notes in that range. It's the range that you sing in, not the scale. The scale, sort of in itself, has a range that it defines. I say an A major scale, that's from the low A to the high A. And everybody should have that easy octave. But if you have that note, that note, that note, that note, that note, then you've got 5 scales that you can move between. If you've got 2 octaves of range, you can sing any scale that's written. Most people who are not carefully trained don't have 2 octaves of usable range. They have an octave and a third, octave and a half, and the wider your range is, the more scales that you can sing in. So it's really the issue of gaining access to the range, the top note to the bottom note, more than it is that there is a particularly sympathetic scale that you sing in. We're going to get there in just a minute. As we start talking about yodeling, we're going to start talking about falsetto. But for most men, falsetto is a place where they don't go very often. But if everybody can understand the behaviors between the heavy mechanism, heavy voice, and the light voice, then you can move readily between. And so I bring you back to your straws. The straws are the tool that can help you to get access to that upper range, gentlemen. If you get into that, you can feel it flip over. So then, with that straw in your mouth, you can also sing tunes. In the upper range, sing Mary Had a Little Lamb. That was very creative. So here we go one more time. Here's the starting note. Go. No, somebody instead of singing, is singing. That's the modal voice. That's the modal voice. Get up into that upper range. If you got the straw in your mouth, you're not going to hurt yourself. It may not sound very good in your ear, but that doesn't matter. We're not here for pride purposes, right? See, now take the straw out of your mouth. Nobody's bleeding at the throat. Nobody's really stressed, except that it just feels a little unusual. The vibration patterns for men, primarily, are just unusual. They're not unhealthy, just relatively unfamiliar. So what do? You get familiar with them, and here's a way to do it without hurting yourself. So again, with the straw in your teeth, you can do that same gliding that I was just talking about. Let's go to the low range, shaw. First say it. Okay, you got it where it is. Go. Easy as pie. Then that's also very successful. Then good. And now you've got access. You all just went through 2 full octaves of range. The human voice actually has about 3 octaves of total usable range. Nah, that's wrong. 3 octaves of range. The usable part is about 2 octaves worth. The highest notes that you make, nobody wants to hear. The lowest notes that you make, nobody wants to hear most of the time. But the notes from near bottom to near top, those are all open season, open game. And if you can get access to them, if you can get comfortable with the using of those ranges, you will move into any song that you want. Now, those glides that I was just doing for you and having you do are the tools that you use to blend those registers together. The human voice, as I said a few minutes ago, is divided into 2 registers, a high, light voice and a low, heavy voice. But as life goes on, along about the time of puberty, there's enough stability in the larynx that starts to emerge a mixing voice that shares characteristics of the light voice and the heavy voice. And when that mixing starts to occur, you have the ability to move upwards in that scale and still maintain some degree of coordination, and downwards in that scale. The trained human voice is the mixed voice. The untrained human voice is either the modal voice or the light voice. But when you train it, you start developing the ability to mix it, and mix it a little bit at a time. So as I slide, that top note has much more light mechanism and less heavy mechanism in it, and the bottom note has more heavy mechanism and light mechanism. It's just a kind of a synergy that goes gliding back and forth. And it carries the characteristics of the heavy voice in that it's rich and full, and it has characteristics of the light voice, that it has a sweet, easy quality to it, and you get the best of both worlds instead of leaving them in isolation. The ability to widen your scale has everything to do with the ability to blend those registers together. When you yodel, you don't want to do that. You want to separate them. You want to isolate the qualities that are unique to them, to each register. So if you say yodel-ay, 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 you hear what I'm doing? I'm just flipping back and forth between those registers. That's easy enough to do. Every boy that's been through puberty knows how to yodel. Right? Here's your lower voice. Now flip. See, you can do it. The problem is that while you're doing it, you got to be able to land on a note that side and a note on that side. Yeah, that's right. And that's just a question of trial and error. It really is a question of trial and error. No different than learning how to shoot free throws in basketball. You first pick up the basketball and you throw it, and you can't find the hoop to save your life. You bounce it off the rim. Sometimes you don't even make it to the basket. But over a period of time, the motor skills necessary, the trajectory, and all of that comes to where you can become quite consistent with that. Will you sing with me very slowly that little pattern that I just sang to you? We'll start right there. Yodel-ay. Ready? Yodel-ay. Some of you got in there, and some of them were way off in the stratosphere. So once again, yodelay, yodelay, yodelay. It goes like this: yodelay, yodelay, yodelay. One more time from the beginning. Yodelay, 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 yodelay. Should I sing it one more time? Yodelay, 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 yodelay. Try it one more time. Yodelay, 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 yodelay. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not a yodeler. Today is the first time that I'm messing, when I was preparing for this thing, first time I started messing around with yodeling. Because I just never, in my business, yodeling isn't part of the game. But it isn't, if you understand the principles, it isn't hard to do. Now, that brings back to the question about, what about the falsetto? Ask your question again.
What about the male falsetto voice?
What about it?
Well, it's very high, and it's very much out of the normal register.
Yes, let's put it this way. It's not the mode that people normally use.
Correct, but there are a lot of singers today a lot of male singers today use that voice in public appearance.
They do very much. However, the sound that they make is not really a falsetto. There is, evolving in the popular vocal styles, a really, really high belting quality that is in the same range as falsetto, but has more core in the sound than that's falsetto. One of the weaknesses in using falsetto, man, is that it's always very light. And when you try to get any intensity in it, it quits or it breaks, and it's very untrustworthy. And so, in that sense, this other sound is more successful. Let me see if I can get myself into that mode, and I'll show it to you. So that's not a falsetto where I would have to break over. But that sound is just as, it's a very high head voice, very forward, and there's no strain. There's no strain associated with it. Would that be something that you all... Thanks. That sound is actually designed for highly intense moments, where that's what belting is supposed to be, a healthy way to be able to make very intense 21st century angst sounds on the Broadway stage. And so it's a sound of what we used to associate with screaming, and it used to be very destructive in the voice, but they found ways to be able to do it so that it creates that kind of tense quality without any strain happening on the voice. So the interesting thing about that quality is that it can be very quiet, and it can be very loud, and it can blend across into the other voices without having to be yodeled into place.
So is there any way then to get strength and power into the male falsetto voice? Or are you just stuck with what's there?
No, this game that we're playing right now with the sliding back and forth kind of goes on stacking itself from the... I limited us to what I thought would be the functional range. But if you do this same kind of activity 1 degree higher, you'll move into that voice. You'll remember that I went shaw, 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 shaw. And that's that upper one that we didn't go to. Shaw. You can see that that's a range that I don't use very much. And so there's a little bit of instability that if I were really going to have to do that, I'd have to work that out. Or else I'd hit that place where it's a little unstable, and I wouldn't be able to trust whether the note was going to come out on that side of the line or that side of the line, and it'd be scary. But if you get into that mode, this would be a mode for you to be able to find in your barber shopping really readily. It's really just that, yeah, and it's very brash, and it's very bright, and it's very forward, and it's usable. However, it's not usable in yodeling, because it requires a mixing register instead of an isolation of registers. And so the best place to use yodel is to use the male falsetto, because it is the most distinctive and the most different from the modal voice. Let's see, we've talked about harmonization a little bit. You've got a little theory behind it at least, and a little bit of practice. We've talked a little bit about yodeling and how you isolate, and we've talked a little bit about register integration. So let me go back and just sort of summarize, and then we'll open up the time for questions that might be not only associated with this curriculum, but any of the other pieces of curriculum along the way. In recapitulation, the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about is that the human voice has a heavy mechanism and a light mechanism. It also has the ability to develop a mixing mechanism. And in that mixing voice, you all can sit down for a second. You don't have to keep standing. In that mixing mechanism, the mixing voice, there is a tendency to be in a heavy mix, meaning that it's at the bottom of that mixing range and it's got more of the heavy voice than the light voice. Or you can be at the top of that mixing voice where the characteristics will be more light voice but with just a little bit of the mixing of the lower voice in it. And that mixing voice is the ticket. That's the ticket to being able to expand your range. Getting to feel what it feels like to have both the light mechanism and the heavy mechanism integrated together. The transition from heavy mechanism to light mechanism, when they're not blended together, is very abrupt and very awkward. When you develop a mixing voice, that transition is less awkward, but there is an awkwardness, a secondary awkwardness that creates when you go from this pure heavy voice into the mixing voice, and another awkward moment as you leave the mixing voice and go into the light voice. For men, it's that transition that's the most scary. For most men, it's that transition from the mixing voice up into the top voice. For women, it's usually either that middle, the difference between the light voice and the heavy voice, or the transition from the mixed voice down into the heavy voice. But everybody has some part of their range that can be a little bit vulnerable, a little bit weak, and the solution to that is just to work on it. The music that you sing is normally confined to a very narrow compass, meaning that it doesn't go that high and it doesn't go that low. Now, sure, there are some calls that are to show off the fact that somebody has a wide range, but most of them stay very safely. If you can develop an ability to cover the compass of about an octave and a half, you should have the ability to sing about 90% of all of the recordings that have been made. If you don't have that, then you're limited to the ones that happen to fit your range. If you can go to 2 full octaves, you can sing any calling record that's ever been recorded. You're perfectly able to do anything that comes down the track at you. And it doesn't mean that you have to be held hostage. These little exercises that I've given to you, if you'll conscientiously mess around with them, you will find solutions to them. They don't happen from one moment to the next because you now have information, and the next challenge for you is to take that information and apply it to your own lives personally to the point where you work out the solutions to your weaknesses. But if you persist at doing that, you will eventually resolve those problems. And that which is difficult for you to today will be easy for you to do in the future. Not because the nature of the task got any easier, but because your capacity to execute it gets better. We just are creatures that learn and we adapt. And if you keep putting yourself in that environment, soon you'll find yourself with an expanded range. So that's the next part of the conversation from today, to finding those registers, blending them together. Then if you want to yodel, you purposefully isolate them. You don't blend the voices together. You let them flip back and forth. The task there is just to be able to make sure that the pitch that's accurate on the low note is right on, and that the note that you're singing on the upper side is right on. And initially, if you sing yodel-ay, 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 okay, yodel-ay, that little thing is just simply that the muscles don't know quite what you're asking them to do, and they need a chance to figure it out. So, yodel-ay, then you harmonize with yourself as you yodel back. That's right. That's right. Then the other thing that we talked about was harmonization, where in the normal Western culture, a scale is made up of 8 notes, and within those 8 notes, before you return to the note an octave higher, the 3rd scale step, the 5th scale step, and sometimes the 6th scale step are those notes that work most readily in harmonizing the tunes that you'll be singing. And so that's the theory behind it. It's built on that overtone series, and thereafter you just play around until it sounds good. Literally, that's what it is. There is no mystery to it. There really is no mystery to it, now that you know how it is brought about. Being able to do it is another thing than being able to know how it's done. And the only solution to that is just to do it. And along the way, you tolerate the fact that you sing some sour notes. You just do. And so you do an awful lot of singing off the podium. You do an awful lot of singing with your friends and your family. You do it with other colleagues. You just get, it's a little game. It's actually a very, very delightful way to entertain yourselves in the evening. You start out and you just don't do it very well, and you laugh and have a lot of fun at each other's expenses. But as you go along, it just gets better. And it isn't like years. It's like months before you start figuring out how to do it. It really isn't a lifetime study. Those that have been doing it for a lifetime just have a head start on the rest of us. But we can catch up really readily if you just do it. Okay, I think that covered my curriculum. The little straw I offered to you just both as a warm-up and a cool-down. Okay, so now that sort of leads us through all of the topics that were supposed to be part of the Progressive Voice Seminar. Are there questions or conversations that you'd like to have to kind of pull strands together?
One of the things that I've found when working with brand new callers is tonality problems. The only thing that I can think of is time is the only way to solve that, and just keep singing. Do you have any magic tricks for tonality?
No, there are no magic tricks. That is one of those skills that it takes time to develop it. In the same way that eye-hand coordination is required for most athletes, there is I don't know what you'd call it, an ear-throat connection where you hear a pitch and then somehow intuitively the muscles know what they need to do to be able to reproduce that pitch. That's a skill that's most readily learned between the ages of 6 months and 3 years. Those people that were around music in their early childhood have an advantage over those that were not, just simply because they learned that as part of the normal pattern of living. There's nothing strange about it. Matching pitch is just a simple thing to do. For those people that bypassed that experience, who in their early lives weren't around music of any kind, they missed that fundamental period of time when you can learn unselfconsciously. And it's the self-consciousness that gets in the way of most adults. You just feel, you don't do it very well, and so you're embarrassed. And children just don't get embarrassed, and so they have that great advantage. So I'll just finish the comment here, and then we'll come over there. The advantage that an adult has over a child is the ability to think. Children don't think very well. They just imitate. But adults, if they can allow themselves the privilege of becoming childlike, can pick up that skill very quickly because they have the ability to analyze. If they can analyze without criticism and without judgment on themselves, they can discern more quickly than a child. And where it might take a child 18 months to develop tonal memory, an adult can develop that skill in 4 to 6 months, just simply by hearing, matching, hearing, wandering around until it matches, and a bit by bit, tonal memory is established, and then that person from that point forward will be able to match pitches. But it's like any skill learned late in life. The later you learn it, that the longer it takes for it to really become deeply embedded in your psyche. So it takes a certain amount of careful concentration for a long period of time, and that aggravates adults, and they mostly become discouraged and give up. It isn't that they can't do it, it's just that the optimum time for doing it passed them by. Let's turn over here.
On the subject of yodeling, I wanted to point out that there's a sweet spot that is the easiest place to make that leap between the two. And so if you're not having much success, chances are if you try a different key, that you'll find your sweet spot, which will make it easier to do. And chances are you'll start too low, and if you move up, you can find that spot, and then that's the key you need to be in.
So he's actually speaking in a way that is somewhat contrary to what I was saying. I've been putting forward the notion that there isn't such a thing as a right key for any person. But I know that within your culture there is that strong concept. So I don't want to really speak against it. I really just want to say that if you develop your abilities, you'll be fine. You won't have to have a particular key to sing in. What he was talking about here, Hal is saying, is that if you start too low and you go to flip into your falsetto, it'll be too low and you won't make it into your falsetto. That's right. And so that's a sort of built into the physiology of the human voice. So if you elevate the key, you'll get to the point where the place where you have to yodel is on across that. However, most yodeling records are set in that place where they know where that break point is. So it's sort of built into the structure of the song generally. But I do want to come back to something that he was saying about the sweet spot. That's a really good thing for a person to know. We have lots of ways of identifying how our voice vibrates. The heavy voice has a tendency to vibrate in the chest and in the back of the mouth. And so that's the place that most men are familiar with. The light voice doesn't locate itself there. It actually locates itself in a much more forward place. If, for example, I do an exercise, this is called the messa di voce, a mixing of voices. It goes like this. Ya, where I go back and forth between the heavy voice, loud, heavy voice, light voice. Ya, now that note is spinning. It's sort of hanging on itself. I'm not having to prop it up. And it just has a place where it vibrates. That place for me is sort of back behind the bridge of my nose, up through the hard palate, behind my eyes, sort of in the middle of my head. And if I can get there, then I can find the light voice. That's where the light voice generates itself. And that also carries the name in our field of being the spinning place or the sweet spot. It's a place where the voice will sing itself without having to be pushed into its place. Then, if you're looking for a way to really mix your voices together, you take that light place and you just build the intensity in that place and not let it migrate back to the place where you think the heavy voice is supposed to be. That's a really cool exercise for helping blending the voices together. Sometimes we think about blending voices from low to high, but when you're going from loud to soft, it's the same game. The soft is the light voice. Then the louder you go, the more heavy quality comes into it. And then you pull it back to the light spot, and it's all built in that little spinning place. So that's a very sophisticated vocal exercise, usually the last vocal exercise that a professional singer, professional opera singer gets.
For the benefit of the tape, I'm John Jones, and your time is up. Before we go, though, how many of you have now completed all 3 courses? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 20 of us, and I think that's pretty good for our first situation that we have had of the Progressive Voice Seminar that the brainstorm started about 5 years ago, and we finally got it together. And you will receive a certificate of completion of the Progressive Voice Seminar, and this is the first time CALLERLAB has ever done anything like this. And we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Dr. Arden Hopkin.
Thank you all. I need you